MKUltra was a project conducted by the CIA during the 1950s and 1960s. Directed by chemist Sidney Gottlieb, the goal of the program was to develop mind control techniques to be used for interrogations. This was mainly due to the Cold War, as there were rumors circulating that other nations, such as China, Korea, and the Soviet Union, had developed psychological control methods. These techniques were meant to eventually be used against these countries and other communists. The program included many highly unethical and illegal experiments on vulnerable populations, such as mental hospital patients, criminals, and college students. Many of the subjects were not informed of these experiments and thus did not consent. Techniques used included use of psychedelic drugs like LSD, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and electric shock therapy. In the years following the end of the program, almost all documents pertaining to MKUltra were destroyed by CIA Director Richard Helms. Despite this, in 1974, the New York Times published an article exposing various details of the experiments to the public. Although the article did not explicitly name MKUltra, its publication sparked the initiation of more official investigations on the subject. As a result, more explicit details of MKUltra were eventually leaked to the public, and a series of Senate hearings exposed previously confidential information about the program's existence and activities. Ultimately, the project came to an end in the late 1960s, concluding that mind control was not possible. While this program ended decades ago, its impact can still be felt today, influencing public discourse about government transparency. It continues to stand as an example of how unfettered access to power may lead to violations of human rights.
The scientists in charge of MKUltra were largely inspired by the technique of Nazi soldiers of using LSD during interrogations during World War II. These controversial practices served as a grim foundation for what would become some of the most controversial government programs in U.S. history. Project Bluebird, which was later renamed Project Artichoke in 1951, was a precursor to MKUltra. Defined by the CIA as the study and/or use of special interrogation methods and techniques, the program used drugs, chemicals, hypnosis, and total isolation. Overall, the agenda of the program was to explore the potential of mind control, develop interrogation techniques, study the impact of drugs, including LSD, which would become particularly relevant later, and investigate hypnosis. Originally, the program was under the responsibility of the coordinating unit of the CIA, but it was later transferred to the Office of Security. It explored very similar topics to MKUltra, and it laid the groundwork for it.
As previously mentioned, the drug LSD was frequently used in these secret experiments. LSD is a psychedelic drug that alters people's thinking, emotions, and sense of time. Symptoms it can cause include hallucinations, confusion, headaches, vomiting, fast breathing, and a feeling of euphoria. The drug was first created in 1938 in a laboratory in Switzerland. However, it wasn't until 5 years later that the potency and psychoactivity of the drug were discovered. LSD was first brought to the United States in 1949 for potential therapeutic uses. MKUltra often used this drug as a truth serum for mind control and to influence behavior. LSD isn't particularly harmful in small doses, but if administered frequently and for extended periods of time, it can be very damaging. Currently, while preliminary research has suggested that LSD may have some beneficial functions, it has no medically approved uses.
MKUltra was made up of 149 sub-projects, one of which was Operation Midnight Climax. In this, the CIA would hire prostitutes to lure clients to CIA safe houses. Then, these men would be given LSD and observed through cameras in two-way mirrors to study their behavior. The idea behind this was that these men would be too embarrassed to talk about what they went through. In addition, in 1945, the CIA launched a prerequisite program known as Operation Paperclip. Through this project, the CIA recruited former Nazi scientists to learn about the interrogation techniques that they used at concentration camps such as Auschwitz. Nazi data was then applied to these experiments.
Because the CIA destroyed the majority of the files associated with the experiments, the precise number of victims of MKUltra is unknown. However, there are several very prominent ones. Frank Olson was one of the directors of the LSD program. On the night of November 28, 1953, he jumped out of the window of his hotel in an apparent suicide. The CIA provided little to no information about the circumstances of his death to his family. His funeral was held with a closed casket, and his wife was discouraged from viewing the body due to claims that he had sustained serious facial injuries in the fall. Decades later, it was revealed by the CIA that before his death, Olson was unknowingly fed LSD. This happened because he was considering leaving the CIA and thought that taking his job had been a terrible mistake. Because of this, the CIA deemed him a security risk and had him killed. Following this information, his sons had his body retrieved and autopsied, revealing findings that were inconsistent with the CIA's initial explanation for his death. As a result, his family was compensated $750,000 by the U.S. government. Whitey Bulger was a prominent murderer and crime boss. He volunteered for the CIA's LSD experiments during his first prison sentence in the late 1950s because doing so would lower his sentence. Prior to participating in the experiments, he had been somewhat involved in crime. He had a few minor offenses and was serving his sentence for armed robbery. However, following his participation in the experiments and his eventual release from prison, he became heavily involved in organized crime. He became the leader of the Winter Hill Gang and was involved in several violent crimes, including murder. At his murder trial, a juror suggested that the LSD experiments may have altered his brain, leading him to commit murder. Since then, several jurors have expressed regret, wishing that they had not voted to convict him because he may have not been in a proper state of mind. Ultimately, in 2013, he was convicted on 31 counts and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 5 years in prison.
In 1973, the Senate Watergate Committee investigation, which was created to look into President Nixon's involvement with the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters, revealed that the executive branch directed intelligence agencies to engage in at least somewhat unconstitutional activities. Then, in 1974, the New York Times published an article saying that the CIA had been conducting illegal activities on U.S. citizens. In 1975, the experiments were leaked to the public by Congress's Church Committee and Ford's Rockefeller Commission. Richard Helms, the CIA director at the time, had ordered all files relating to MKUltra be destroyed in 1973. However, in 1977, 20,000 documents that had survived the order were revealed through a Freedom of Information Act request, which is an official way of asking federal government agencies for information. Following this, the CIA directly admitted that the experiments had little to no basis in scientific fact. In early 1976, a few months after, President Gerald Ford signed into law Executive Order 11905. It strove to improve the quality of intelligence needed for national security, implement more oversight over foreign intelligence activities, stopped the CIA from performing political assassinations, and prohibited drug experimentation on humans without informed consent. Moreover, the families of many of the victims of the experiments reached settlements with the government and were compensated, such as the Olson family, as previously mentioned. In 1978, the Foreign Intelligence Act was passed, which required intelligence agencies to obtain authorization before the collection of foreign intelligence. The goal of this act was to protect people's privacy while still focusing on national security.
The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research both conducted hearings to examine the project. The Senate hearings exposed the studies that the CIA had funded, the lack of oversight into MKUltra, the experiments on unwitting citizens, and numerous other issues with the program.
There were several immediate outcomes of the reveal of the MKUltra experiments. Firstly, there was a spike in mistrust toward the government. Although skepticism had already existed in recent years, the exposure of MKUltra intensified these feelings. Also, some historians suggest that the experiments indirectly contributed to the rise of psychedelic drug culture during the 1960s. However, this claim is controversial and not everyone agrees. The aforementioned mistrust in the government was worsened by other similar exposures in the early 1970s. Watergate, as previously mentioned, showed the people that the president was engaging in political espionage, and the Pentagon Papers, released in 1971, showed that President Johnson had lied to the people regarding the American involvement in the Vietnam War. Between these scandals and the exposure of MKUltra, the American people were forced to realize that the government could and would lie to them whenever it benefited those in power. Additionally, the experiments continue to have relevance today. For example, Stranger Things, or more specifically Hawkins' lab within the show, and the experiments in supernatural powers were loosely inspired by the MKUltra program. More generally, the program has contributed to conspiracy theories, controversies over research ethics, and discussions about government power.
While MKUltra was unethical, it has undoubtedly left a lasting impact on the world of intelligence and experimentation. It also helped to permanently alter how people in the United States view authority, creating a society where conspiracy theories and government mistrust are commonplace. It serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked government power as well as the dangers of allowing fear to override morality.